Hello, and welcome back as I answer your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. Today's question is on pyramids. Really? Pyramids? You want me to talk about pyramids? Do I have to talk about pyramids? Yes. Aren't people bored of pyramids? Okay, I guess I'm talking about pyramids. When I teach classes at a university, I normally take about 3 to 4 weeks to talk about pyramids. And that's because there's a lot to say about pyramids. Now, a pyramid, shape aside, is the tomb for a king or a queen, usually. And when a pyramid was built in ancient Egypt, the tomb was started with a piece of flat bedrock. And they would burrow down into that bedrock to carve the tomb out. And once that tomb was carved out, they would put the sarcophagus in it and then build the pyramid on top. So most of the pyramids in ancient Egypt were actually solid. An important exception to this is the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza. That pyramid has actually 2 burial chambers. One dug underground, and then another one that was built up into the pyramid itself. But most of the pyramids in ancient Egypt were solid. Now, when we think about pyramids, we tend to gravitate right to Giza, where you have the 3 great pyramids. The Pyramid of Khufu, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the Pyramid of Menkaure. The Pyramid of Khufu is the largest pyramid in Egypt. And it was made with over 2 million blocks of stone. And the stone blocks are graduated. So you have the biggest stone blocks on the bottom and the smallest ones on top. And it took 35 years to build the Great Pyramid. However, when we talk about pyramids, it isn't the same as when the Egyptians talked about pyramids. We think of Khufu's pyramid as being the pyramid par excellence. Because we look at the engineering technology and the precision with which the stones were cut and fitted, and we think to ourselves, wow, this is magnificent engineering that sort of arose out of nothing. Well, the fact is that Khufu's pyramid was the result of 300 years of pyramid building tradition. The first pyramid in Egypt, 3 centuries earlier, was built by King Zoser and his engineer Imhotep. Zoser's pyramid was actually an improvement upon mastaba tombs. Now, a mastaba was the preferential tomb of kings and later on nobility, but it was essentially a square platform that was built over a tomb. And it was to mark that someone important was buried here. The mastabas of the early kings of Egypt were decorated on the outside, sometimes like a palace, sometimes they had bull statuettes at the bottom. It was an important landmark to show, here's the tomb of a king. Now, King Zoser went a step beyond what his predecessors had done. He had dug his tomb into the bedrock, but then he laid a mastaba on top, and then a second mastaba on top of that, and a smaller mastaba on top of that, and a smaller mastaba on top of that. So we had a stack of mastabas, 6 mastabas tall. This became known as the stepped pyramid or stepped mastaba. But when the Egyptian kings later on reflected upon pyramid building, their idea of the pyramid par excellence wasn't Khufu's pyramid in Giza. It was Djoser's pyramid. And not because it was an innovation, but because it was an artistic masterpiece. His pyramid was a complex of tombs and chapels and offering tables and interesting novel features that the kings of Egypt pined over and desired to replicate. Underneath Djoser's pyramid is a labyrinth. And there are galleries in that labyrinth. And some of those galleries have been decorated with blue-green faience tiles that look like reptile skin. Gorgeous. His funerary chapel has cobra statues along the top. It is an artistic masterpiece. Now, we go forward a few centuries to the reign of King Senefru. And King Senefru represents the next sort of pioneering phase of pyramid building. Senefru is the most important pyramid builder after Djoser himself, because King Senefru built more pyramids and perfected pyramid building technology. King Senefru built 3 major pyramids: the pyramid at Meidum, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red or Northern Pyramid. Now, the first 2 were abandoned. When we look at, say, Khufu's Great Pyramid at Giza, we go, wow, what great engineering precision! We look at Senefru's pyramids and go, wow, what shoddy workmanship! And that's because it was a trial by error with lots of error. Pyramid technology didn't develop overnight. It had a lot of problems and bumps along the way. We look at, say, the Bent Pyramid, where the blocks are not precision cut, and there's big gaps between the blocks. The workers tried to overcome this, or cover it up, by filling gravel and sand between the blocks, which is not a great solution. And even less so is that the pyramid was architected at a very steep angle, which created downward pressure on the blocks, causing subsidence. Now, the engineers tried to overcome this by changing the angle of the pyramid midstream, giving the pyramid a bent look. However, that didn't fix the problems, and the pyramid was ultimately abandoned. So Senefru went on to make a 3rd pyramid, called the Red Pyramid or Northern Pyramid. And that was a smaller pyramid than the first 2, but it was precisionally made. The blocks are tight-fitting, it was beautifully done, and it was probably the pyramid where Senefru was ultimately buried. Now, we also see that around these pyramids is a funerary complex, which I alluded to with King Djoser's pyramid. Now, a lot of the pyramids that we come across in Egypt are not marked. But how do we know who's buried in what pyramid? Let's go back to Giza for a moment and talk about Khufu's pyramid, because we have one inscription in that pyramid that says it belonged to Khufu. there is a single cartouche but let's say we didn't have that cartouche. Let's say we had an unmarked pyramid. How would we know who occupied that pyramid? Well, pyramids were more than just the tomb of a king. They were the center of a royal necropolis. If you were somebody in ancient Egypt, a who's who, a really important person, you wanted to be buried as close to the king as possible. And that's because the resurrection of the king was guaranteed. But for you to have a more guaranteed resurrection, you needed to be closer to the king and more important by association. So the princes, the magistrates, the viziers, the high scribes of Egypt all wanted to be buried near the king. Which is why when you have a pyramid, you also usually see a few satellite pyramids, which would be used to bury the queens. And then around that, mastabas for the highest noble officials. And then around that, smaller rock-cut tombs for other nobility and scribes. And unlike the pyramids, which were generally unmarked until the time of King Unas, these mastabas were elaborately decorated and carved with inscriptions and paintings. And the interesting thing is, everyone wants to be associated with the king. Very close to the pyramid at Khufu, we find the mastaba of Queen Hetep-Heres. Hetep-Heres was the wife and queen of King Senefru, but she was mother of Khufu. And she extols the fact that she was mother of Khufu, the mother of a king. So you'll find that around these pyramids, all these people saying, well, I was the vizier of King Khufu. I was the steward of Khufu. I was the son of Khufu. So you get this mass of graves around these pyramids saying, I am such and such person related to the king. So it's really easy to identify whose pyramid belonged to whom just because of the name dropping involved. So we have at Giza all these pyramids made of stone. But we see that with King Khufu, his was the largest pyramid. But after that, pyramids get progressively smaller. And that's because of economic reasons. Egypt, like other countries, suffered from inflation. And building pyramids out of stone was really, really expensive. So we have from the mythology that the building of the Great Pyramid by Khufu nearly destroyed the economy of the country, which is probably true. So every king afterwards started to economize, first by making the pyramids smaller. But then they started making the pyramids out of mud brick. And what they would do is they would make the core of the pyramid out of mud brick and then line the outside with stone. Make it look good on the outside. Well, inside it's kind of mushy. Yeah, that's sort of how pyramid technology went forward. And what happened was these pyramids were not as structurally sound as their predecessors. So what happened is they started falling apart. And today, you go to the pyramid of King Unas, and you'll see that his pyramid is nothing but a rubble pile, even though his burial chambers are intact because they were built underground, out of stone. Now, pyramid building continued into the Middle Kingdom, and it continued that technology of mud brick with stone, but eventually it started to decline around the end of Dynasty 12, and when you get into Dynasty 13, the pyramid becomes really a shadow of what it once was, and pretty much ended during Dynasty 13. Now, the very last pyramid in Egypt was built by King Akhmosa, the first king of the new kingdom. Now, already at this point, pyramid building was out of vogue. But King Akhmosa wanted to send a message. He was the king that drove out the Hyksos, the Semitic rulers of Avaris. So King Akhmosa was trying to make a statement. He was trying to say he was an Egyptian of Egyptians, a Theban prince through and through, a true-blood Theban prince. So what better way to do that than just build himself a pyramid? So at Thebes, he builds himself a pyramid, which happens to be around 40 meters by 40 meters, or only about 120 feet tall. A pale shadow of the former kings of Egypt. Now, after Akhmosa, the kings of Egypt no longer built for themselves pyramids. They started building in the Valley of the Kings. But the Valley of the Kings has a unique feature. It's got a mountain that overshadows it, that's shaped like a pyramid. So it was no longer necessary for the kings of Egypt to build themselves pyramids, just to be buried in the shadow of the greatest natural pyramid of them all. Thank you very much for your question, and I look forward to talking with you again next time as I answer your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible.